Hi, my name's Cole Marwick. The day my mother died, my father didn't hug me. He handed me a pen and said, "Sign here." My stepmother stood behind him, laughing, while they made me sign the paper that ended my right to even touch her hand one last time. Hours later, at the will reading, she leaned over and whispered, "Guess you'll be homeless now." But then, the lawyer cleared his throat and said, "There's one final clause." That was the moment her smile, finally, disappeared. And that's where everything started to unravel. The hallway outside my mother's hospital room was too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's waiting for someone to break it. The lights flickered, humming low above the metal chairs lined against the wall. I sat there, hands clasped, staring at the floor tiles as if they might tell me something that made sense. My mother's last breath had sounded like forgiveness, and I wasn't ready to let her go. When the monitors went still, I thought the world should have stopped too, but it didn't. The vending machine kept humming, the nurse kept walking, and life, somehow, kept moving without her. The double doors swung open. My father, Gerald, walked in, his shoes clicking against the tile, sharp and steady. No hug, no look of comfort, just a hand outstretched, palm up. "Do you have her paperwork?" I blinked at him. "What?" "The insurance forms, the release document. They said you were handling them." His tone was flat, rehearsed. I swallowed, trying to pull my thoughts together. "Dad, she's gone, Cole," he interrupted, adjusting his tie. "We need to deal with what's next." Behind him, Veronica stood in her sleek black dress, one arm folded across her chest, the other holding her phone. She looked, almost, entertained. I glanced back toward the room where my mother lay. The nurse was still adjusting the sheet, tucking it neatly under her chin. I wanted one more minute. Just one. "Can I?" I started. "No," my father said. "The staff needs the room." That was the moment it hit me. Grief wasn't going to bring us closer. It was just going to show me who was never really there. The nurse walked over with a clipboard. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Marwick. We just need your signature here to release her body to the funeral home." The form was thin, harmless looking, but it might as well have been a wall between me and her. I hesitated, pen shaking in my hand. Gerald's voice was sharp beside me. "Sign it, Cole. Don't make this harder than it already is." Veronica's perfume drifted in as she leaned close, her voice soft, too soft. It's what she'd want. I wanted to tell her she didn't know what my mother would have wanted. She hadn't spent the nights watching her struggle to breathe, hadn't heard her whisper apologies for things that weren't her fault. But the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest. So I signed. That was the paper that killed the hug. I didn't even get to hold my mother's hand one last time. When I set the pen down, the nurse nodded politely and stepped away. Veronica took a deep breath, like a performance was ending. My father pocketed the document, already checking his watch. "We'll arrange everything tomorrow," he said, his voice clipped. I stared at them both, wondering how people could stand in the same room with death and still think about schedules. As I turned to leave, the nurse stopped me again. "She wanted you to have this." In her hand was a small blue envelope, edges worn, my name written in my mother's careful script. I stared at it for a long second. "What's in it?" Veronica asked. The nurse smiled faintly. "She said he'd know when to open it." I slipped it into my jacket pocket without another word. Whatever it was, it could wait. Right now, everything hurt too much to matter. We walked down the hall, the sound of our shoes echoing off the tile. When we reached the elevator, I heard Veronica whisper to my father, her voice low and sweet. "You don't have to pretend anymore. It's done." He didn't answer, just pressed the button. I didn't turn to look at them. My reflection in the metal doors looked pale, older somehow. I could have said something, demanded what she meant, but I didn't. It's strange how silence can sound like the end of love. As the elevator doors closed, I told myself that the worst was already over. My mother was gone. What could hurt more than that? But grief has a way of lying to you. I thought the worst was losing her. I didn't know I was about to lose my home, too. I pulled into the driveway just after 6. The sky was that dull, bruised shade of gray Houston wears when it's threatening to rain, but never quite delivers. I hadn't even taken the keys out of the ignition when I saw them. 2 guys in matching Navy uniforms hauling a dresser onto a moving truck. On the side of the box, written in bold black marker, it said, "Veronica's bedroom, fragile." At first, I thought I'd lost track of time. Maybe I'd forgotten something. Maybe this was unrelated. But then I saw her. Veronica. Standing right there on the front porch, like she'd lived there her whole life. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, wearing that robe she always paraded around in on weekends. Like the house had belonged to her all along. "You're early," she said with a smirk. "We didn't expect you." I stepped out of the car, slow and careful, like one wrong move might shatter what little was left holding me together. "I live here," I replied. "Where else would I go?" She raised her eyebrows like she pitied me. Not for long. That's when the front door opened and Gerald appeared. My father, still in his hospital slacks, now with a leather folder tucked under his arm. He didn't say a word at first, just walked down the steps, handed me the folder like it was a package delivery. "What is this?" I asked, even though I already had a sinking feeling I knew. "Your mother signed the property over 4 years ago," he said, voice dry as dust. "The deed is in Veronica's name now." I stared at the papers, pages of legal language and a signature that looked like my mother's, dated barely 6 months after her diagnosis. 6 months after she started forgetting the little things. Burnt toast, missed appointments, my birthday. "She didn't even know what she was signing," I whispered. Gerald shrugged. "She trusted me, and so should you." Veronica let out a soft, theatrical sigh. "You're welcome to take your things. What's left of them anyway? We've boxed them up for you." I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, like I'd swallowed sand. I walked inside, slowly, hoping this was some kind of sick joke. The hallway looked unfamiliar. All the family photos that had lined the walls were gone. The spot above the fireplace, where my mother's portrait used to hang, empty. Just a faint outline in the dust, like someone had erased her from our lives. I turned and headed out back. Maybe they had stored the boxes near the garage. That's when I saw it. Her portrait, leaning against the garbage bin, the frame cracked, the glass missing. Rain spots had already started to dot the canvas. "She said that wall needed a fresh start," Veronica called from the porch, taking another sip of her coffee. I didn't look back at her. Didn't give her the satisfaction. I bent down, brushed the dirt from the bottom corner of the painting, and stood there holding it like it was the last piece of her I'd ever have. There were 100 things I wanted to say, 1,000 I could have screamed, but I didn't. Sometimes silence is the only language the betrayed still control. Inside, I found 2 small boxes marked Cole Misk. One had my high school yearbooks, the other had a few shirts, a pair of running shoes, and a beat-up duffel bag. That was it. 28 years of life, boxed and labeled like clearance stock. I packed what I could. The house still smelled faintly of her lavender candles, the kind she used to light when the weather turned like this, moody and cold, but refusing to storm. I slung the duffel over my shoulder and turned to leave. As I did, something fell from my jacket pocket onto the hardwood floor. The blue envelope. I stared at it. My name. Her handwriting. Still sealed. I bent down, picked it up, ran my thumb across the edge. Not yet. I tucked it back into my jacket and walked out the front door without saying goodbye. Just as I stepped off the porch, Veronica called out behind me. "You'll thank me one day for letting you go." I didn't answer. I just memorized the sound of that door closing. The sound of that door closing followed me all the way down the street. I don't know how long I drove. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. The roads blurred together until the glow of Houston faded behind me, and the night became just headlights and the low hum of the tires on the pavement. By the time I saw the flickering neon sign of a roadside motel off I-45, my mind felt hollow, like someone had scraped everything out and left only the echo of loss. The sign buzzed unevenly. Vacant Y. The letter C had burned out. I pulled in anyway. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a pickup truck and a car that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. She slid a key toward me, her eyes never leaving the small TV behind her. Room 6 smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner, and the air conditioner made a noise like it was clearing its throat every few minutes. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and sat down beside it. For a while, I just stared at the pattern on the comforter. Little brown leaves fading into fake gold. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up every few seconds with messages I didn't want to see. "We're so sorry for your loss. Thinking of you, cousin. If you need anything, call us." I didn't reply to any of them. None of them had shown up at the hospital. They didn't hold her hand, didn't stand in that cold room when the machines went silent. Then another message came in, the only one that made my chest tighten. It was from him. "It's time to move on, Cole. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at the words, reading them again and again. My father's tone even carried through the text. Controlled, emotionless, practical. Like grief was a business decision. I pressed delete without replying. The silence after that felt heavier. The kind that makes you start talking to the walls just to prove you still have a voice. I lay back on the bed, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. I thought of the house, of Veronica's laughter as I walked away, of my mother's portrait leaning against the trash can, cracked and rain-spotted. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a voicemail notification. The number made my heart stop. It said, "Mom, voicemail, one new message." I sat up staring at the screen, confused. That number shouldn't even exist anymore. I'd seen her phone sitting on the hospital nightstand, dead, forgotten. I hesitated, thumb hovering above the play button. When I finally pressed it, there was a moment of static. Then her voice. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone." I froze. Every sound in the room disappeared except for her voice. "There's something I need you to know. The truth isn't in the will. It's in what I couldn't say. Find Mr. Lyle. He knows." The message ended with a faint click. For a second, I just sat there, breathing shallow, waiting for it to replay on its own. Then I hit the button again. And again. Each time, her voice sounded both closer and farther away. Find Mr. Lyle. He knows. Mr. Lyle. The name felt like a whisper from another life. I hadn't heard it since the day of her first hospital stay. He was our family attorney, an old man with gentle hands and the kind of patience that made you think he'd lived 10 lives already. Then, months before she passed, he just vanished. Retired suddenly, they said. No forwarding address, no explanation. Now she was telling me to find him. I set the phone down and rubbed my face. The motel's neon light bled through the curtains, painting everything in sickly pink. The hum of the sign outside was steady now, like a heartbeat I couldn't sync with. I played the voicemail one more time, then saved it. It felt wrong to let it sit in the digital ether, like something that precious could be erased by accident. You knew this was coming, didn't you, Mom? I whispered. Her voice, even recorded, had the same calm she carried when she'd tell me, "It's okay, Cole. We'll figure it out." Except this time, she wasn't here to figure it out with me. That voicemail wasn't just a goodbye. It was a map, a warning. I reached for the notebook from my bag, tore out a page, and wrote down the name in big block letters. Mr. Lyle. Then I circled it until the ink pressed through the paper. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel entirely lost. The grief was still there, yes, thick and unmoving. But beneath it was something new, something sharp, purpose. I looked at the jacket hanging on the chair. The blue envelope peeked out from the pocket, the corner slightly bent. Not yet. I walked over, touched it gently, like it might burn me. Whatever was inside had waited this long. It could wait a little longer. I sat back down on the bed, phone in one hand, the paper with Mr. Lyle in the other. The air conditioner coughed again, sputtering into silence. My mother's last words echoed through my head. Forgive your father if you can. Forgiveness. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Forgiveness is easy when you don't know the truth, when you don't see how deep the knife went. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and listened to her voicemail one more time before turning off the phone. The sound of her voice filled the room, soft but steady. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded certain. That certainty began to build inside me, quiet but unyielding. Maybe I had lost my home. Maybe they'd taken everything that tied me to her. But they hadn't taken this. Her words, her truth. I whispered to the dark, "I'll find him, Mom. I'll find out what you couldn't say." The neon light outside flickered once, then steadied. Her voice ended with a click, but it wasn't the sound of goodbye. It was the sound of a door unlocking, but not the motel door behind me. It was something inside me, a quiet latch that had held me in place since the funeral finally gave way. The next morning, after 2 cups of motel coffee and 5 minutes of staring into the parking lot, I checked out and drove south. Galveston wasn't far, just an hour or so down I-45, but the air felt heavier the closer I got, as if the ocean knew what I was about to dig up and was warning me with each mile. The law office was tucked between a pawn shop that had "Buy Gold" spray-painted on the windows and a boarded-up diner with an old Pepsi sign swaying in the wind. Lyle and Associates, Legal Counsel, read the rusted nameplate, barely hanging on by one screw. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and something older. Dust blanketed the front desk. There were no voices, no phones ringing, just the faint sound of blinds clicking against cracked windows. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a receptionist, maybe a man in a gray suit, waiting like he'd known I'd come. Instead, a woman appeared from the back room with a cardboard box in her arms. late 40s, tired eyes, paint on her jeans. "You lost?" she asked. "I'm looking for Mr. Lyle," I said, trying to sound casual, like I wasn't about to throw up. She set the box down slowly. "He left months ago. Didn't say much, just that he was done with law. Said a case got too personal." She glanced at me, then added, "He looked scared." That word stuck. Scared. She walked around the desk and opened a drawer, rummaging until she pulled out a plain white envelope. "He told me if someone named Cole came by, to give him this." My name was scribbled across the front in shaky handwriting. I thanked her, stepped outside, and sat on the curb, envelope in hand. The wind tugged at my sleeves, and I could hear waves crashing somewhere in the distance. Inside the envelope was a photocopy of a legal document, a draft will, signed by my mother. I recognized her signature before I saw the date, 6 months after her diagnosis, months after the version Gerald had filed. My eyes skimmed the pages until a single line stopped me cold. "In the event of my passing, my son Cole Marwick shall retain ownership of the Marwick estate." There it was, proof. She'd meant for me to keep the house, the garden she planted, the walls she painted, the only place I'd ever felt safe. Tucked behind the pages was a sticky note, faded but legible. "Gerald replaced the original before filing. I tried to stop it." My stomach turned. It wasn't just emotional theft. It was legal fraud. My mother's dying wishes, overwritten, her trust, twisted. I almost didn't hear the woman come back outside. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she said, arms folded. "But the night before Mr. Lyle left, I saw a man and a woman here late. They argued with him. He looked cornered." "Did you recognize them?" She hesitated. "Only because of the news from your mother's funeral. It was your father and his wife, wasn't it?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "They came out through the side door. He never came back after that." I sat in silence, the document heavy in my hands. The police had called it retirement. Just like that. A man disappears, and it's labeled paperwork. Neat. Unquestioned. "Maybe the truth didn't die with her," I said out loud, more to myself than to her. "Maybe it was buried alive." She stepped back inside, and I stayed there on the curb, letting the weight of it settle. I could have crumpled right there. But I didn't. I held the envelope tighter. Part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in rules and reason, whispered, "Walk away." But another part had already drawn a line in the sand. I reached into my coat pocket. The blue envelope slid into view, its corners worn from days of being held and never opened. I lifted it toward the light. Just beneath the flap, I saw faint curves, my mother's handwriting. Not just my name, a sentence. "She wanted me to find this," I said quietly. "She wanted me to see what they did." For the first time, I wasn't afraid to keep going. As I stood and walked back toward my car, I folded the draft will and slid it into the glove compartment. The door shut with a soft click. Then I noticed the car across the street. Black, windows tinted, engine humming. It didn't drive off. Not until I did. By the time I reached the edge of Houston, the afternoon light had turned sharp and gold, cutting through the windshield like a blade. I'd rehearsed the drive in my head a dozen times. Every word, every breath, every possible outcome. But none of it felt real until I turned into the long driveway of my father's new house. Or mansion, I should say. The iron gates opened slowly after I pressed the intercom. No voice asked who it was. Just a mechanical buzz, A silent welcome for someone they weren't expecting. The house looked like it had been built to impress people who didn't matter. Wide marble steps, tall glass doors, walls that probably echoed because there wasn't enough love to fill them. Veronica opened the door before I could knock. Her hair was perfect, her perfume thick enough to choke on. She smiled, and the kind of smile that belonged in a real estate brochure, not real life. "Well," she said, leaning against the door frame, "we were just talking about you." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Then, this should save you some time. The place was spotless, cold, not a trace of my mother anywhere. No photo, no memory, not even her favorite vase that had once sat on the fireplace mantel. The silence was the expensive kind, designed, intentional, suffocating. Gerald sat in a leather chair near the window, swirling whiskey in a glass like it was part of his hand. "You look tired," he said. "Long drive?" "Not long enough," I said, setting the envelope on the glass table between us. The copy of the draft will inside felt heavier than it should. He didn't reach for it. Just looked at me, calm as a man with no conscience left to disturb him. "What's this?" he asked. "You tell me," I said. "You forged her signature, didn't you?" His eyes didn't flinch. "You always had your mother's imagination." Veronica laughed softly. "Or maybe," she said, circling behind my chair, "you just can't accept that she didn't love you enough to leave you anything." I turned to look at her. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Sometimes silence says everything. For a moment, nobody moved. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. My heartbeat matched it. Then something inside me cracked open. Not anger exactly. Something older than that. I saw flashes. My mother crying quietly at the kitchen table. My father's voice low but sharp. The word waste thrown around like a curse. He never yelled where people could hear. Only at home. Only when he could win. "You did this to her before she died," I said quietly. "You broke her down until she'd sign whatever you put in front of her." Gerald exhaled through his nose, like he was disappointed in my performance. "You have no proof," he said. "And you have no idea what you're talking about." I leaned forward. "I have enough. And you know what else I have? A copy she signed later. The real one." That got his attention. The glass in his hand stilled. He looked at Veronica, and for the first time, something like fear flickered behind his eyes. Veronica's tone turned sharp. "You're bluffing." I reached into my jacket, pulled out the photocopy, and slid it toward him. "Read it. Or maybe you already know what it says." He didn't. He didn't need to. The color in his face gave it away. After a long silence, he stood up. "You listen to me," he said, voice low and steady, the kind of tone he'd used when I was a kid and he wanted me to feel small. "If you push this, I'll make sure no one believes you. I've got signed statements. From doctors, from Veronica, from family. You're unstable, Cole. You always have been." My chest tightened, but not from fear, from recognition. This was how he won every fight, not by strength, but by rewriting reality. Veronica smirked. "You really think anyone would take your word over ours?" I stared at both of them. Two people who had taken everything and still thought they could walk away clean. "You're right," I said finally. "No one would believe me. Not yet." Veronica laughed again, but it sounded nervous this time. I picked up the paper and tucked it back into my jacket. "You know," I said, "Mom used to tell me something. She said the truth is the only home you'll ever need. You can lose everything else, but not that." I turned toward the door. Gerald's voice followed me, heavy with threat. "Walk away, Cole. Don't make this worse." I didn't stop walking. "You already did." Outside, the sunlight felt colder. I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the horizon. My hand brushed against the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the outline of the blue envelope. For weeks, it had felt like grief. Now it felt like direction. I got in my car, started the engine, and whispered to myself, "He told me no one would believe me." He was right, until I decided to make them see. I pulled onto the shoulder of the highway and just sat there a minute, engine still running. There was a pressure in my chest, not panic, not fear exactly, but something colder, a knowing, whatever line had been drawn before. I'd already crossed it. The sun was starting to slide down toward the trees, brushing the world in that pale orange glow that never lasts long. I opened my glove box and pulled out the slip of paper I'd written in a hurry the night before. Henry Wexler, Notary Public, scrawled above an address I found buried in Lyle's old contact files. Sugarland was about 40 minutes southwest. Quiet place, retirement town these days. I knew the drive wouldn't be long, but what waited at the end might change everything. The office sat in an old converted home with peeling white trim and a faded closed sign tilted halfway in the window. But the door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like thyme, dust, paper, and faint lemon oil. Stacks of manila folders lined the walls, marked with decades of transactions and names I'd never know. Henry Wexler was older than I expected. Thin, white hair combed neatly back, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up from a ledger when I walked in. "Help you?" he asked, voice gravelly but firm. "I'm here about Elaine Marwick's will," I said, stepping closer. "You notarized both versions." His eyes narrowed at the name. He set down his pen slowly. "She was a fine woman," he said cautiously. "But I only notarized one document for her. That was years ago." I pulled the photocopy from my coat pocket, unfolded it, and placed it gently on his desk. "Then maybe you can tell me why your seal's on this." Wexler leaned in, and for a long moment, all I heard was the clock ticking on the wall. He touched the paper like it might burn him. "That's my stamp," he said, voice low. "But I didn't notarize this. That's not my handwriting." His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "And that's not my signature." I didn't move. Neither did he. He looked up. When Gerald brought the second batch of papers, I told him no. Said I wouldn't stamp anything without Elaine present. He said she was too sick to come in, just wanted to clean up some wording. I still said no. "But this document got filed anyway," I said. He nodded slowly. "I assumed he went to another notary, but if this is my stamp and not my signature..." He trailed off. "That's a federal offense, Mr. Wexler," I said. "I know what it is," he replied, voice tight. "But you need to understand. Your father has friends, real friends, judges, bankers. If I speak out..." "He already buried my mother's name," I cut in, calm but firm. "I'm not asking you to take a bullet. I'm asking you to tell the truth." He didn't answer right away. Then he leaned back, exhaled hard, and said, "Leave the copy with me. I want to compare it to my old logs. Come back tomorrow." I nodded, though I had no idea if he'd still be here tomorrow, or if he'd change his mind once Gerald found out. As I stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the wind had picked up. The air smelled like a coming storm. That's when I saw it again. The black SUV, parked across the street, angled just enough to see the door I'd walked out of, Tinted windows, engine off, but I could feel eyes on me. My phone buzzed in my hand. No caller ID. Just a single message. Stop asking questions. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then took a screenshot. After that, I opened my camera and began recording. My face, the car, the street sign, the time. I wouldn't be gaslit into silence. Not again. By the time I returned to the motel, the sky had darkened into deep blue. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat on the edge of the bed with my back to the wall, staring out at the flickering motel sign through the curtains. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. Old photos of Mom, smiling, gardening, standing beside me at high school graduation with her hand on my back. Then, one I'd almost forgotten about. Her, Mr. Lyle, and Henry Wexler at a charity event years ago. Elaine was in the center, laughing like she'd just told a secret. She trusted the wrong people, but maybe she'd taught me better. My hand moved toward the blue envelope resting on the nightstand. The paper looked worn now, edges soft from being handled so many times. I picked it up, turned it over, held it up to the light. Inside, I could just make out handwriting, hers, not printed, personal, meant for me. My thumb ran along the flap. Not yet, I whispered. Almost. The phone was still recording, and it would keep recording. From now on, every step I took was going to be documented, because this wasn't just my fight anymore. I thought I was chasing ghosts, until the ghosts started chasing me. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there on the motel bed, eyes open, listening to the air conditioner rattle and hum like it was struggling to keep up with the weight of the air. By morning, the unease hadn't left me. It had settled into something sharper, focused. I packed my bag and checked out before the sun had fully risen. The roads were slick with last night's rain, but the skies had gone pale again, as if pretending nothing had happened. It was a 2-hour drive east to Beaumont. Clara's house sat just past a grove of oaks, tucked into a quiet corner of town that hadn't changed much in 30 years. I remembered it instantly. The yellow porch swing, the wind chimes that jingled even when the air stood still. When I stepped out of the car, the scent of wet earth and magnolia clung to everything. She opened the door before I could knock. "About time," she said, voice gentle but cracked by time. Her eyes welled the moment she saw me. "You look like your mother when she was angry. All tight shoulders and no sleep." I stepped forward, and before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around me. It was the first time in days I didn't feel like I was being hunted. "Come in, baby," she whispered. "She told me you'd come." The house smelled like chamomile and old books. The walls were lined with framed pictures. Some of me as a kid, most of Mom. Clara had never married, never had children. She was more than a friend to my mother. She was the person who stayed behind and remembered. Over tea, we sat in the living room. The light from the rain-streaked window made the place feel like a memory. She held her cup with both hands like it kept her steady. "She knew Gerald would come for everything," Clara said quietly. "She didn't trust the courts, didn't trust the law. So we made a plan." I leaned in. "What plan?" "Your mother moved part of the estate into a private trust," she said. "One that only you could access, but only if you could prove the original will had been tampered with." She reached into a drawer and handed me a photograph. In it, Mom was sitting at this very table, signing a document. Her eyes were focused, lips set with purpose. In the background, Clara stood watching her, hand on her shoulder. "She set it up so that when you found out the truth, you'd have a way to fight back," Clara said. "She didn't want him to win." Not this time. My throat felt tight. All these months, I'd believed she'd left me behind. But she hadn't. She was fighting for me even after her last breath. I looked at the blue envelope still tucked in my coat pocket. Its weight had changed. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was strategy. She left instructions in that envelope, Clara said, nodding. We never talked about what they were. Only that when the time came, you'd know. My hand moved over the edge of the table, grounding myself. I'm not sure what scares me more, opening it, or what happens after. Clara leaned back, her face softening. Elaine knew the price of truth, but she paid it anyway. Question is, will you? Before I could answer, Clara stood and walked to the hallway. She returned holding a small tin sewing box, the kind you'd find in your grandmother's closet. I never opened it, she said, placing it in front of me. Lyle gave it to me the night before he disappeared. Told me to give it to you when you came asking. My heart thudded against my ribs. I opened the box slowly. Inside, beneath spools of thread and faded needles, was a flash drive, unmarked, innocent-looking. I plugged it into my laptop. What loaded next stopped my breath. Dozens of scanned documents, financial ledgers, emails, photographs. One showed Gerald handing a manila envelope to a county clerk outside a golf course. Another detailed wire transfers to a private account in the Cayman Islands, days before Elaine's revised will was filed. There were notarization inconsistencies, forged initials, altered timestamps, all of it. Every thread of deception woven into my father's empire. And then, a video file. I clicked play. It was a recording. Lyle speaking directly to the camera, dated a week before his disappearance. If you're watching this, he said, then I've failed to keep Elaine's final wishes intact. Gerald forced my hand. But the truth is here. Everything you need to undo what he did is on this drive. Just be careful. He doesn't lose quietly. Clara had tears in her eyes. I didn't know what was on it. I didn't want to know. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for me to act. All this time, I whispered, I thought she left me nothing. But she didn't, Clara said softly. She left you justice, the one thing he can't buy. I sat back, the rain still pattering gently on the roof. Everything I needed was here. Truth, motive, proof. And now I had a choice to make. Expose it all, and Gerald would go to prison. The family name, the company. It'd collapse under the weight of scandal. Everyone who stood by him would fall with him. Your mother said the truth would cost you everything, Clara said gently. Are you ready to pay that price? I closed the laptop. It already cost her, I said. I won't let it take anyone else. As the evening deepened, I sat quietly, the flash drive in my pocket and the envelope still sealed in my coat. Clara lit a lamp, the soft glow washing over the room. The ghosts weren't chasing me anymore. They were pointing the way. The files on that drive could burn everything to ash, or finally bring her peace. Either way, tomorrow, I stop running. I left Beaumont before dawn, windshield wipers barely keeping up with the sheets of rain. Thunder rolled low in the distance, and something about the sky felt right, like even the heavens were fed up with lies. By the time I pulled into the long gravel driveway of the Marwick estate, night had fallen hard. Lightning flashed above the hills, turning the mansion's stone face ghostly white for a split second at a time. I didn't bother ringing the bell. I pushed the front door open with my shoulder, soaked to the bone, clutching a manila folder in one hand and the blue envelope in the other. Inside, laughter. Gerald was mid-sentence, entertaining a handful of men in tailored suits and one woman in pearls who laughed like it was paid by the note. Wine glasses clinked, the fireplace crackled, and for a moment I wondered if they'd even notice the storm outside. But when I stepped into the room, dripping wet and eyes locked on my father, silence fell like a curtain. His smile didn't falter. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" he said, swirling his whiskey. Veronica, seated to his left, froze with a half-raised glass and that smirk she always wore when she thought she'd already won. I walked forward, slowly. Rainwater pooled behind each step. I dropped the envelope on the coffee table, then the folder. "No more games," I said. "Let's finish this." Gerald didn't even glance down. "You think barging in like this is going to change anything? You're just making a scene." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. My mother's handwriting. Elegant, sure. Below it, a second USB drive, identical to the one from Clara's house. I turned to their guests. "You'll want to see this." I pulled the TV remote from the tray and plugged the drive into the smart panel. The screen flickered. A video file loaded. Play. And there she was, Elaine Marwick, my mother, sitting at a long table in a modest office, flanked by Mr. Lyle and Henry Wexler. The date in the corner time-stamped 6 days after the version Gerald filed. Her voice came through the speakers, calm, deliberate. "This is my final will and testament," she said. "I am of sound mind and under no coercion." You could have heard a pin drop. I turned slowly to face them. "Forgery's a funny thing, Dad. It always leaves fingerprints." Gerald bolted up. "That footage is fake!" He lunged toward the screen, but Veronica caught his sleeve. "Gerald, don't," she said under her breath, shaking. I didn't flinch. The notary seals match Wexler's registry, and Lyle backed it up before he disappeared. He pointed at me. "You think this makes you a hero? You just destroyed your own family." "No," I said, stepping toward him. "You did that the day you made a lie your legacy." Veronica's voice cracked. "It wasn't just him." The room turned toward her. I helped," she stammered, eyes darting to the guests. "He told me it was just about cleaning up the paperwork. I didn't know it would go this far." Gerald turned on her like a coiled snake. "You idiot." But it was too late. The investors, their friends, started backing away. One whispered into his phone. Another slipped his business card off the coffee table and tucked it into his coat like he didn't want it left behind. The collapse had begun. I reached into the folder and laid out copies of wire transfers, legal discrepancies, time-stamped emails. I've already sent copies to the state attorney's office and 2 reporters. By morning, this won't be a family matter anymore. It'll be public record. Gerald stood there, jaw clenched, his empire unraveling faster than he could react. The storm outside pounded against the windows. Veronica's eyes filled with tears, not remorse, but fear. The kind of fear people have when their security evaporates in real time. I pulled the final card, the letter, and set it on the table. She wanted me to live in truth, even if it hurt. I read aloud, "Home isn't a place, my son. It's the truth you choose to live with." And with that, I turned and walked to the door. The sirens were already approaching, growing louder over the thunder. Behind me, Gerald slumped into his chair like the wind had been knocked from his chest. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. Just stared blankly as everything around him began to crack. She won, didn't she? He muttered. I looked over my shoulder. No, she just told the truth. When the sirens stopped, I didn't feel victorious, just free. And somehow, that was enough. The storm passed sometime after midnight. I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't restlessness this time. It was clarity. When the morning light filtered through the motel blinds, warm and still, I finally felt like the dust had settled. Not just in court filings or family secrets, but inside me. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the same legal office where I'd once been told I was left with nothing. Funny how time rewrites things. Ms. Hayes, a quiet, efficient woman in her 50s, offered a gentle nod as I stepped in. Clara sat beside me, her hands folded neatly over her purse. She looked tired but peaceful. I appreciate you both coming, Ms. Hayes began, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. This is the officially authenticated will of Elaine Marwick, verified through chain of custody, notary records, and now, public confirmation. My fingers hovered over the seal. I looked at Clara, who nodded. I opened it. She read aloud, calm and steady. To my husband, Gerald, I leave my silence. To my son, Cole, I leave the truth, and everything that carries my name. No fanfare, no spite, just truth. Ms. Hayes continued, the estate, foundation, all properties. Every single asset in Elaine's name, now mine. I sat back, breath shallow, but she wasn't done. There's one more piece, she said, reaching for a small black remote. A screen lit up behind her. And then, there she was, my mother. She sat in the garden, hair swept back, a scarf around her neck I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Cole, she began softly, if you're hearing this, it means the lies won for a while. But I knew you'd find your way. You always did. She smiled, not a dramatic smile, just her smile. The kind that used to calm me down after I'd scraped my knees or lost a baseball game. I didn't want you to fight for money. I wanted you to fight for truth. Let what I built become a shelter for others, not a monument to pride. The screen went dark. Clara reached over and placed something in my palm. The same photograph she'd shown me at her house, my mother signing the real will. Lyle beside her, Wexler watching carefully. They all looked so certain. I think she knew, Clara said quietly. How hard it would be for you to believe she'd thought this far ahead. But she did. I swallowed hard. For years I'd told myself I was forgotten, that she'd abandoned me with her silence. But sitting here, surrounded by proof, I saw it clearly. Her silence wasn't neglect. It was strategy. She gave me space, so I could grow into the kind of man who'd earn the truth. I looked at Ms. Hayes. I'd like to convert the estate, I said slowly, into a charitable trust for single parents, domestic abuse survivors, in her name. She blinked. That's a significant change. I know, I replied. But it's what she asked for. Not in legal terms, in spirit. She nodded. Then, let's get started. News of Gerald's indictment broke that afternoon. Fraud, forgery, obstruction. The press didn't hold back. His face on every local outlet. Not as the business giant, but the man who defrauded his own wife's dying wishes. Veronica, gone. Left the country. Last anyone heard. No goodbyes, no press release, just vanished. Weeks passed, and one morning I visited the detention center. He looked thinner, less polished. His hair grayer, suit traded for state-issue beige. But it was his eyes that struck me. Not angry, not ashamed. Empty. You came to gloat? He asked, voice hoarse. No. I pulled a chair, sat down. The silence hung for a while before he broke it. "You're just like her," he whispered. I didn't flinch. "That's the first true thing you've said in years." We didn't speak again after that. Later that day, back at the attorney's office, I packed up the remaining documents. As I slid my wallet into my coat, something caught. The blue envelope, still folded, now empty. I held it between my fingers for a moment. It had once held the weight of everything I didn't know. Now it held nothing, but meant everything. I kept it. Not because I needed it, but because I never wanted to forget. The truth doesn't arrive. You fight for it, you protect it. As I stepped outside, the Houston sun greeted me. Warm, steady, honest. She didn't leave me the house. She left me a home, one built on truth,